I think we'll make a start. So first of all, I'd like to thank everybody attending this afternoon's webinar. My name is Robert Crosby. I've been with QMS for just over 3 years now. I specialise in consultancies and internal auditing for a range of management systems, particularly the business continuity management standard, the quality management standard, the environmental management system standard, and also the health and safety standard 45001. Just before we start, I'm sure that as we go through the webinar, each of you may have some questions. So if you do have any questions, you'll see that within the webinar, you've got the opportunity to submit questions. And generally what I'll try and do is I'll let those questions accumulate, because I might actually answer the questions as we go through. But we'll get to the end of the webinar and my moderator will help me generate the questions, and we'll get them on screen, and hopefully we'll be able to answer any questions that you may have. So without further ado, I'd like to make a start. So the purpose of this webinar is really to go over internal auditing and the general principles around internal auditing and how to internally audit. The things that we'll be covering today will be: what is an internal audit? How does it help your business keep compliant, and how does it help the business? What are the different types of audits that you may carry out? And then when we actually look at the detail within that, we'll be looking generally at how to plan an audit, the considerations for that, picking a team, the resources that are required, actually carrying out the audit, and then recording the results, generally understood as an audit report form. So what is an internal audit? As many of you may already know or may not know, it's a way of actually checking your management systems, your processes and procedures, and it's just aimed at aiming to see whether that management system is running correctly and it's in accordance with how your business is set up. Now, they are the actual standards themselves. They contain many requirements, and generally speaking, those are the types of things that you're going to audit when you carry out your own internal audits. And also, as we've mentioned earlier, there'll be certain processes that help you make up your compliance to those standards. So it's about auditing those as well. And it's also about ensuring that those procedures are being followed. Why would we set procedures up? Well, it's to make sure that we can run our business, and we can make sure that as a business we're controlling what we do, so that the end client gets what they're wanting from you. And generally that's termed as customer requirements for any products and services that you may be offering to a client. Generally, the internal audits and processes, they're checked so that we can make sure that everything's been adequately documented, correctly implemented, and effectively maintained. We want to make sure that the things that we put in place, people are following it, and that our systems are robust enough to deal with any actions or any shortfalls in that system. And again, it's about looking at, when we do identify when there are shortfalls, what are we going to do about it to rectify that? Because ultimately we want to be able to make sure that as our business proceeds with its day-to-day duties, that everybody within the organisation understand what they do. And as we say, the internal audit process is a way of checking that. We generally have to ensure that our management systems and our processes remain compliant. And again, when you're registered to a standard, generally the internal audit mechanism will ensure that that's compliant, and that you can deal with non-compliance if you ever uncover that non-compliances are being made. An important part of internal audits, again, is to record those internal audits, because when an external body like QMS come in to do in external audits, we'll want to see that you've carried out similar processes internally, so that we can see that you're checking on your systems, and we can also make sure that you're actually complying to the standards that you're bound into. Okay then. And as the slide suggests there, if your process for auditing is carried out and it's carried out according to a plan, at least it's going to give you a chance to see where shortfalls are existing, and it will give you a chance to correct those shortfalls, so it prevents further misunderstanding, further inconsistencies within the processes that you have in place to run your business. Generally speaking, each business is different, and certain businesses might only require a small amount of audits, but it's an activity that we generally have to make sure that we do, so that we can conform to the standard. Larger organizations might have many things and complex processes. So in an example of a large organization, they may require more audits than a smaller organization. So what are the benefits of auditing? Well, we've already mentioned some of those in our previous slide, but some of the benefits, obviously, they make sure that things are being carried out in accordance with how you expect them to be carried out. If you set objectives, we can check to see whether the objectives are being followed and that they're being managed effectively. They help your organisation to communicate where there is good practice, good behaviour, but they also help to communicate when things aren't going as we expected, in order so that we can correct those with a view to them effectively being eliminated. So we're not wasting time, we're not wasting efforts, and we're not wasting resources in correcting actions that continually happen. The audits themselves will enable people and individuals to report concerns, and generally you may actually find that carrying out an audit will actually identify a concern that people haven't raised previously. It's quite an effective training tool. As you're carrying out the audits, you can explain to your employees the reasons why you're doing it. You can relate back to the processes that have been set out, and you can help them understand how the processes have a wider effect on your business and why those processes need to follow. And generally speaking, the consequences of not following those processes and procedures. We can also make sure that by carrying out internal audits and external audits, that planned arrangements are being carried out. So in terms of quality, in terms of service delivery, in terms of information security, in terms of how your business continuity management is carried out, internal audits will allow you to check all those processes. And again, it's based on, generally speaking, when we're enshrined within a system or a standard, we have rules, general rules to follow. And again, we can make sure that through internal auditing that those processes are being followed, and that we're effective in being able to demonstrate that they're being followed. One important feature of an internal audit, it will allow you, when the need arises, to actually report non-conformances and provide feedback to supervisors and members of staff about how effective a particular process is. So as an example, if you have a purchasing process and there are one or two elements from that purchasing process that are not being followed, that would generally be found in an internal audit, just naturally by carrying out an audit. Not true in absolutely every single case, but generally, if you're looking and spot checking and you're looking from an outsider's point of view, looking at the process, and you're not necessarily, as a purchasing manager, involved in that process, you can actually ask questions to the purchasing manager. You can generally see through internal auditing how effective their process is, and whether the people and processes are effective. And again, one of the other benefits of auditing is to ensure emergency deviations don't become common practice. So not when I say firefighting, it's not just getting a fire extinguisher and putting out the fire. The term firefighting is generally turned to when you're dealing with actions on a day-to-day basis. The purpose of auditing is identify what's not going wrong, correct it, and with a view to it putting it right so it never happens again. So it prevents us from wasting time and resources in deal with firefighting or deviations from the system. So the principles of auditing. So generally, there are six main principles. We've got to have integrity, as auditing has got to be integral to what we do, and it's also got to be quite robust in what we do. It's got to be seen as a useful mechanism for checking our systems. Confidentiality. So the purpose of an audit is to check your findings, check your processes, and identify what is going right and what is going wrong. It's not a case of where we're carrying out auditing to reprimand people. It's more to make sure that we're keeping our business processes in line and, where possible, improving those processes if the need arises. So independence is quite a significant one, because it may be from for example, QMS coming in to do audits for your organization. We're independent in the sense that we don't belong to your organization. We look at your internal audits, we look at your processes, and we carry out that audit from an independent point of view. Now, independence from an internal point of view may be, for example, a production manager going to audit the procurement process or the purchasing process rather than the purchasing manager. So depending on the size of your organization and the amount of people that you have available, independence within audits is very much encouraged where possible. Evidence-based approach. So generally, we would carry out audits according to your processes and systems, and then we require evidence to make sure that those systems are in compliance. And generally, when we look for evidence, we're looking for documents, records. We may chat to people. We may look at computer systems. All that combined will effectively allow you to demonstrate that you've got evidence to suggest that you are compliant to those standards, processes, and procedures. Due professional care. So it's about, again, I think this links into integrity as well. It's about being professional about what you do when you're internal auditor, and not being necessarily being protective because it's your organization. It's about being open to the fact that you're looking at a process and you are assessing whether that process is in compliance with either a standard, a process, or a procedure. So again, having due professional care, it's about how you carry out that audit, how that audit's recorded, and again, I think it really does need to be done in a professional manner, because otherwise people won't see the full value of that audit itself. Fair presentation. So again, I think it links into integrity and due professional care. Make sure that your audits are truthful. There is no point in making things up or not recording the truth, because if you don't record the truth and you're not fairly representing the findings that you've got, it has no overall value to the organization. Again, what your organizations want, you want to be able to know that your systems are actually quite robust, and if people aren't prepared to actually report what the truth is, then all that's going to keep happening is you're going to keep firefighting, and you're going to have to keep on dealing with these day-to-day actions, when really you have an opportunity in an internal audit to actually communicate what the problems are, discuss a way forward, and again, it really centres back to not wasting time and resources into correcting things that you could have potentially identified a week ago, a month ago, a day ago, a year ago. Okay then. So There are four aspects to auditing, and again, whether you're new to auditing or whether you are an auditor that's been audited as a quality manager or as an environmental manager, etc., for many years, you will probably realise that not audits are the same. There are generally four aspects to auditing. There are system audits, process audits, project audits, and product audits. So what I'd like to just generally do now is just give you an overview on the kind of things that's involved in each one of these aspects. So a system audit. So a system audit is really centered around your management system. If you're certified to a management system, generally there's a set of standard requirements that the business has to meet. And by carrying out a system audit, you're generally checking that all of the clauses of the management system are being followed and they're being adhered to. Now, for some people, that effectively that may be represented via a quality manual, an environmental manual, or a roadmap of something similar to an environmental or a quality management manual. Generally, the written manuals will contain all of the necessary requirements that clarify what the organisation's actions are to comply with the standards. So again, whether you are using the actual standard as a document for auditing or whether using your manual, system audits will be the overall approach for your management system and making sure that all those clauses within the management system are being adhered to. A process audit, again, it is an audit. It's a bit more specific and it focuses on the individual processes within your management system. So, for example, it might be a training, awareness and competence process that you're auditing. It might be a planning and risk management process that you're auditing. It might be the purchasing process that you're auditing. And generally, when you have a process-based approach, it allows you to look at an individual process, almost put a boundary around that process and audit that process. And by doing so, you can generally audit a number of clauses within the processes because you'll be covering many things. So it might be documented procedures that might be covered in there. It might be purchasing itself. And then you get more into the deep dive of that process of what is actually involved in generating a purchase. So again, it's almost like getting a magnifying glass out and having a look at various stages of that process and then auditing those stages just to make sure that you are, again, compliant to the standard or the manual as some clients may have. A project audit. So this is quite common for people who engage in design or design actual products themselves, or generally it might be an IT related project. A project audit will effectively look at stages of the project. It'll look at what should be carried out within each stage of that project, what validation, verification. And again, by following a project from start to finish, generally you'll be able to have a look at which processes are involved, and generally those processes will align to a management system. So again, you can look at timelines in a project audit. You can look at the documents created. You can look at if you have design drawings or prototypes. You can look at all that process in one project and cover many aspects of the standard simply by just following one project from start to finish. And then we move on to product audit. This focuses on the actual development, for example, and manufacture of a product. So you might want to look at, when you're looking at a product audit, the actual process for how that's created. It might involve your marketing department, for example. It will then look at how you build in costs and how you assess costs to that product. Then you may, for example, look at how that product's manufactured, what quality checks, for example, is carried out on that product, and then what final checks are carried out on that product before it's packaged, what checks are done again, and then when it's sent to the customer, what happens as part of that process for sending it to the customer. Do you create invoices? Is it on account? So when you're looking at a product audit, there is quite a wide scope for auditing. But again, you can look at this in terms of creating, conceptualizing, creating, manufacturing, and then delivering that products to clients. So I'd just like to touch on when we carrying out audits, some of the things that you want to think about before you actually carry out an audit itself. I don't think we should all be flung into the deep end and say to our employees, right, you need to do an audit. There are certain things that you have to consider because it might have certain disruptions within the actual business itself. So think about what the purpose of the audit is that you're there to do. Is it for compliance? Are you looking for improvements? Are you there just to check that your management systems processes are in alignment with how you expect them to be? You'll need to prepare for the audit. So if you've got many clauses to audit, as an example, the ISO 27001 has many clauses to audit, particularly the statement of applicability. And you've got to be realistic about this, because if you don't prepare for the audits, some of the audits do actually take a length of time to complete. Some audits don't have as many clauses in. So again, for a 27001 audit, we'd require more time to audit and make sure that our processes are in alignment with what we expect them to be, and also that the statement of applicability is in accordance with what we expect it to be. The statement of applicability is, again, it's just a list of controls that the organisation says that they have in place to maintain information security. If you run in a quality management system, there are many clauses that involve design. If you do design, there are clauses that involve purchasing. There are clauses that involve operational control. So as an organisation and as an organisation who need to set up management systems audits, you really need to know the scope of the audits and generally what work's involved, how many things do you need to check, and how are you going to plan that out. And again, I don't think anybody expects this to be done, on one day of the year. I think it's generally accepted that you're going to spread it out over a period of time, so that it allows you to still run your business, but also make sure that you've got a schedule there that you're following, and that it's reminding people that on certain days in the month they've got some internal audit exercises to do. And again, the last point there really clarifies about having enough time to conduct the audit and also review some of the document procedures, because that may be needed as well as part of the preparation. You may need to review some of your procedures to pick out certain elements from it, and that's what you're aiming to check in the audits that you're going to carry out. A very important one is resources. So again, as I've mentioned previously, how much time are you going to need to complete each audit? Who's going to be involved in that audit? Is it going to be one person carrying it out? Do certain people need to be at work to make sure, or at least available, so that you can actually get the evidence that you require when you're asking those questions? Has the auditor been trained, or do they have experience in internal auditing? I don't think there's anything more frightening than putting somebody in a position where they absolutely are bamboozled by what they need to do. So again, making sure that people have an awareness of internal auditing, creating training for internal auditing, or at least creating the provision of resource so that people are aware of what's involved in an audit is obviously useful. What equipment's going to be required? In the age of technology, we may run our audits on PDAs. It may be iPads, touchscreen devices. It may be, checklists, and it may be pen and ink, and then people may go back and write up their audit reports. So again, generally having your equipment available and making sure that you've got the necessary equipment available during those audits is quite essential. Most organisations have computers nowadays, but not everybody does use computers in the way that other organisations do. So just making sure that you've got your equipment and that they're actually working and that they're available. So I think creating a schedule for audit. I've covered it in a little detail before. Again, I think the points that are on screen there identify some of the considerations that you yourselves may need to look at when setting up your internal audits. Now, an internal audit schedule, in simple terms, it's a plan of how you want to carry out your audits and what timeframes you're going to do them. Now, some people will naturally use things like Outlook to create an internal audit. Some people may use Excel worksheets whereby it's a matrix, and a simple matrix may be down the left-hand side of the page, you have all the clauses, all the processes that you're auditing, and across the top, you've got all the months of the year, so January, February, March, April, May. And generally from that matrix, you can put a coloured box or a date in exactly where you want those audits to be carried out. And again, I think the purpose of creating a schedule is so that many people within the organisation can understand your thought processes in generating audits and also scheduling those audits, and again for availability for audits. If organisations, for example, choose to do audits in June, July and August every year, there is a question there to be had that people like to go on holiday. So there might be an instance there where you have to actually think about that, because really you want certain people available. And if they're not available, you're not going to be always available. You're not always going to be able to get your information at the time of the audit if you're not careful. So creating schedules will allow you to plan repeat audits. So for example, if you feel as though there's an issue with risk assessments, as an example, it might be that as a result of your previous audit findings or your feelings within the company that you need to be smarter on risk assessments, it might be rather than once or twice a year that you're checking these risk assessments, you actually audit 3 or 4 times a year. And again, this comes back to really a risk-based approach. What matters to your organisation? Are your purchasing processes robust? And if, for example, you know that there is a problem with purchasing, well, you could set up audits every month for purchasing, just to make sure that people are aware that you're looking at it and you're looking to make sure that everything is compliant, because you could be losing a lot of money over purchasing. And I'm just using that as an example. One thing that will help you set up your audits once you've been audited after year 1, year 2 and year 3 is your non-conformances. If you raise non-conformances in previous audits, that will alert you and your organisation to say, well, we didn't do too well on this particular aspect this time. But what we can do is again, we can plan in more audits for this particular for this particular clause, just to make sure that we're keeping an eye on it and we're monitoring the fact that this non-conformance, we don't want it to happen again. And again, non-conformance can effectively be a non-compliance on any part of the management system. When you have non-conformances that are common, so you get a trend of non-conformances, that should ring an alarm bell, because effectively, if you're continually getting non-conformances, it would allude to the fact that generally not enough corrective action or preventative action has been put in place to remedy that action in the first place. So it's useful for you to schedule more audits if your organisation feels necessary to do that. And again, I think adapting your audit schedule to the importance of the areas to be auditing. If I was a design-heavy organisation, I would want to make sure that my design processes are absolutely nailed on. If, for example, I was a manufacturing organisation and I manufactured components for the Ministry of Defence, there'd be certain products there that I'd need to make sure that those are manufactured and we're not having faults with. So again, adapting your schedule there, it's up to you to decide what's important for you and how that audit schedule is represented across the year. Some audit schedules, once you're familiar with the internal auditing process and you've carried out auditing, some of these schedules may actually run over a 3-year period, where you actually audit a third of your management system 1 year, a third the next year, and then in year 3, the final year, you've completed your full cycle. The year after, you just go back to auditing the first third. And that's just a rough example of how you can schedule audits. Okay. So just to go into a little bit more detail in carrying out a system-based audit. So the example that you see on screen here is it's taken from a 9001 management system, and as you can see from the clause numbers at the top, it relates to production and service provision, and the actual clause itself is 85.1. So when you have processes written up or management systems manuals, this is the kind of thing that you might see under section 85.1. And what it provides is it provides anybody that's reading it, especially the internal auditor, with a list of controls that the organization's carrying out in order to comply with control of production and service provision. And as an auditor, if I'm reading these processes or procedures, what I'm generally doing is I'm picking out key things from that process. So as the example on screen there shows, we've highlighted, daily notes, we've highlighted computer system records, the service user folder. So in an internal audit, I'd be generally looking for evidence to confirm that daily notes are available and that they've been signed off. Computer system records are available and they're relevant to the products or services being delivered. I'd be looking to make sure that we've got a service user folder, and I may take some samples of what information is contained within that folder, because each one of these is effectively telling the organisation what they should be doing. And when we audit it and we find that we've got this evidence and we can actually evidence it in an audit report, that's giving the organisation the assurance that that process is being run in accordance with how they expect it to be run. And again, just as the final example in the bottom paragraph there, it talks about risk assessments and care plans. So I'd be in an internal audit, I'd be looking for examples of risk assessments. I'd be looking to show that we can actually show that we've got care plans. And again, that may be in paper format, it may be in electronic format, but the fact is it's written into the process. So that's what your internal audit's checking. And that's just generally a very sort of basic overview on the types of things that we look at when carrying out an actual audit itself. And generally speaking, I'll just remind ourselves, the actual process itself tells the organisation what we do, and then the internal audit report, in the internal audit report finding, it actually documents what we found. What do we say we do? What is it that we found? And that is, in general, what an audit report will deliver. System audits may be referred to as clause-based audits. So as you can see by the numbering at the top of the example that's on screen, that identifies clause. And again, some audits may be process-based approach. So it might be that you have 3 or 4 clauses under the same clause. Under the same process. So a planning and risk management process may include clause 6.1, 6.2 and 6.3 as an example, and you may be able to audit the planning and risk management process as a basis for being able to demonstrate compliance. As the slide also says, and as we've clarified, we're generally wanting to find out that we're in compliance with the actual clause itself. Now, you'll notice that we're not referencing the actual clause from the standard, i.e. word for word from the standard. We're actually referencing the clause, and then we're actually checking the controls that make sure that we're compliant to that clause. And I think it's a great way to check that your management system's up to date, it's correct and relevant, because if you find any inconsistencies, you may find that we've listed a document in this process that we no longer use. So that's just a simple identification. Look, we no longer use this document. Perhaps we should amend our management systems manual to reflect that we use a different document, or that we no longer follow this particular process because it may be automated by a computer system, for example. So that's just the basic on carrying out a system-based audit approach. Now, this is just a simple example of an audit report that can be generated from a management system audit. Now, I think the bits the bits that obviously all the document is important, but I think what we'll generally center on is the middle part of the document, the audit questions. So in this particular example, if we actually just look at some of the actual process that we had on screen before, we talked, as we identified there, we talked about delivery notes, computer system records, service user folder, risk assessments, and care plan. When we're creating our audit report as part of the preparation, we may actually write in these questions because we've reviewed the process, and as a result of reviewing that process, this will give me the 5 or 6 things that we need to check during that audit. And what that'll help you as an organization to do is it'll help you to make sure that you're sticking to a plan. You know, it may not be auditing every single clause in your manual or the management system itself under that section, but it allows you to take a spot check, almost like a sample. You're just choosing 5 or 6 things from that process, and you're making sure they're compliant. If you do that audit and then you record it and you find your evidence and everything's in compliance, there's reason there to think you've taken a reasonable sample from different parts of the system, you've checked a number of controls, and every one of them was in compliance. That would generally indicate that you could actually keep checking this all day and you'd find the same thing. Now, if in this instance I carried out this audit and each one of them it found a mistake or something wasn't right, then generally that would indicate to you that particular process needs looking at, it needs reviewing, it needs amending. We need to create additional mechanisms in order to put it right and to stop it from, really, to prevent it from failing in the future. So again, this is a simplest audit report, but it's actually giving you as an organisation the information you need to confirm what's been checked and what your findings were. And as an external auditor coming into your organisation, if you provided this as an actual audit report, I'd be happy that you're actually looking at your management system and you're checking it as the standard requires. So that again, that's just an example of the actual, a quick example of one internal audit. And again, it relates to the previous slide that we put on screen there. It's almost giving you the output from the work that we've done. Okay. So carrying out a project or product or process-based audit. As I've said before, carrying out a process-based audit, you can use the same principles. In order to create a project, you'll need to follow certain things, timelines. You'll need to make sure you've got verifications, validations. So you could effectively create an audit report that covers each stage of that project. And then when you're carrying out an audit, you can actually check a live project, or you can check a project that's recently been finished, check the paperwork, check the documentation, check that you've got a prototype. Product and process-based audit, it's very, very similar. Look at what the inputs are, look at what the processes are, what's happening in between, and then look at what the outputs are. Follow the flow of the operations. Follow, for example, purchasing from start to finish. That could initially be, what date did the purchasing inquiry get raised? Did you raise a purchase order? Who's authorized that purchase order? You can perhaps check 1, 2, 3, 4 purchase orders and check the flow of that purchase order to make sure that from initial concept, i.e. somebody requesting that purchase order, to the actual supplier being paid, you can actually follow that, and it'll give you a bullet point list of the things that are happening and the evidence that you found. A process-based audit, again, it might be how a product's manufactured. Let's take, I don't know, a chocolate bar, for example. There'll be certain things that are needed in a process-based approach, where that chocolate bar, it doesn't just make itself. You have to have certain things in place. And again, that might involve part of purchasing, because you need the raw materials, then you need to put that and schedule it into production. Then you need to make sure that everybody's working to the right ingredients and that they've got the specifications there. You've got to make sure that staff are trained to actually help you manufacture the products. The machines are set up correctly, that the products are being checked with quality checks. And then once the product comes out of the manufacturing process, is it being packaged correctly? Is it being labelled up correctly? Is it being sent to the client correctly? So again, you can look at from start to finish the processes that you've got, and you can choose to go a process-based approach where you actually checking many things within that process. But I mean, as an auditor, it's quite logical for me to follow a process, because it's literally, right, let's start from the beginning. What happens next? Right, okay then, what happens next? Can you show me some evidence of that? What happens next? Right, can we see that in action? What happens next? So you can literally walk through with a product and make sure that all the necessary key elements are being adhered to. And generally, as you will be aware, whether you're delivering a product or service, there are documents that are required. There are certain checks that need to be done. There are certain approvals and authorizations and certain documentation that needs to be made available to staff to make sure that what they're supplying to clients or manufacturing is in accordance with what's been agreed at the point of sale with the client. So what I'd just like to do with this approach, I'd just like really just to identify the kind of things that's involved when you're carrying out a project, product or process-based audits. So I've mentioned this, but as you can see by the slide there are many aspects for a product or process or a project to be carried out. And these obviously give you some examples of what's included. Now, it's not a definitive list by any means, and every organisation is I suppose that it's unique in what they're delivering to clients and how they do that. But this will give you an idea of how each individual part of the organisation or function of the organisation actually fits into the process and the type of things that are looked at. Now, I don't think we need to go over every single example in there, because I think we've given some examples of that. But that overall diagram there will give yourselves an idea of the kind of things that you could be looking at in your internal audits. And I'm sure that some organisations will have many more, but we can only fit so many things onto one slide. But again, this is available to you, so you'll be able to look at that and really jog your minds, get people involved, because they may have critical things that they want included in an audit. And again, you can work with your staff in what's to be included in certain audits. It all seems quite a big thing when you're actually looking at internal audits at the same time, but because you're able to break this down and you're able to bring many people together, it becomes a lot easier for the auditor itself. Okay. So when you're carrying out an internal audit, as we've identified, you may need to review your manuals, you may need to review your operating procedures. And I'll go back to the slide that we had before. You may need to review any part of these: training records, standard operating procedures, your provisions for emergency equipment. This will effectively make sure that you are auditing a broad range of elements from your management system, and making sure that when you're auditing them, that again, it all centers back to being in compliance, making sure and having the assurance that what you aim for the organisation to do is we're doing it. You may, whilst carrying out an audit, you may have to actually observe the process itself. So you might have to sit or stand on a gantry and actually watch that chocolate bar go all the way through, from it being initially poured into a mold or whatever mechanism it's done, all the way through to it's being packaged. And then that'll effectively allow you to see, is the end of line employee checking it? Are they clicking the button on the screen to make sure that the quality check's been done? Are they using calibrated devices for certain quality checks? It'll allow you just to have an overall view of what's happening in that process. And again, you can gain a better understanding if you've never looked at a process-based audit approach before. You'll be looking at any of those records that we've seen on the previous slide. It's a look at to make sure that those records are up to date, that they're valid, that they're being approved. If something requires a signature or a date and it's going through production without those, then somebody needs to say, how come nobody's signing it off? Because potentially you could be sending products through the production unchecked. and by dating them, signing them off, putting people's names to things, it's allowing you to have visibility of what's happened as that chocolate bar or that design project has been delivered to clients. You may also need to carry out conversation with staff members. If you don't understand a certain aspect of the process, you may need to speak with a manager. It might be that as part of the process, you speak with line operatives or administrators. What's their view on how a process should be carried out? Are they following what the company wants, or just because they're not a manager, are they being given the same level of training? So speaking to people at all levels is quite important in an audit, because it'll give you a good understanding of how that system's being managed holistically and whether everybody actually generally knows what they should be doing. And again, by looking at some of these things, it all centers back to for you to be able to create a reasonably good checklist that will allow you to check those elements in an audit, and it'll keep it, rather than spending all day on an audit. If you've got a checklist and you've got certain aspects to check, once you've gone through that check, you generally only have to write up the audit, and then the audit's done. You know, we're not really sort of deep diving into other areas that we don't intend to look at in the audit. That checklist will help you clarify, right, I'm looking at 8 things today in this audit. I don't know how long it's going to take me, but and you might find that even by ordering it in a checklist, it helps you actually minimize the time that you're spending on audits, because it's almost giving you a roadmap for each area that you're looking at. Yeah. So just to reiterate some of the evidence that you as auditors or potential auditors may actually be looking at, they're all listed there. And I've said many of these already, but what I think some things to point out, we'll actually be looking at audit records. It's almost like, do we audit an audit? Well, effectively, yes, you do. You need to make sure that you've carried out your audits, that you've planned your audits, and that you've got a set of audit records that covers the previous audit period. So again, we're making sure that under clause 9.3 of many standards, 9.2 internal auditing, that we are actually carrying out those audits in accordance with the actual standard itself. Other examples include meeting records, management review meeting records. You might need to analyse data, KPIs, quality control records, as I've mentioned previously. A feature within a lot of standards that I particularly cover are HR and training records. It's important to make sure that those records are up to date and that the organisation's managing them, because even with the health and safety standard, and anybody who gets involved with health and safety, you're required generally to have procedures so that people can do the jobs effectively, and that they're not worried about doing the jobs. They have a way forward, and they can actually carry out their operations in accordance with your set procedures. Sales receipts, again, these are all records and documents that may be created as part of a process, but they're all useful as single bits of evidence to confirm that you are actually achieving some of the processes outlined in your management system. And I'm just going to touch on non-conformances as well. It's quite an important one of this. I think it's very important when you're embarking on this for the very first time. It may be that you don't have any non-conformances, which you might think, oh, well, you know, non-conformances, it doesn't really matter to me. But I think where it becomes in very useful is throughout your first year. When you do spot inconsistencies, don't be afraid to raise a non-conformance. It may be that it's not you found a non-conformance, but it's not been in an audit setting. You've seen somebody walk across the yard without the high vis, and it's a transport yard. So an example is raising a non-conformance to basically confirm that people aren't following their operational control measures is a valid thing to do. And at the end of the year, when you're looking at non-conformances and you're having your management reviews, you can actually see the things that have actually been affecting you throughout the year. It allows you to see whether you've got trends. And year on year on year, if I looked at some previous audit reports and I actually see 8 or 9 non-conformances, I'd actually be looking at certain trends in those non-conformances. Is the common elements of why we failed? And then what I generally do is, if it's, for example, operational control, when I carry out that audit, my alarm bell in my head would be saying, right, I just need to make sure that the organisation is absolutely nailed on for operational control, because I know that they've had an issue with this in the future. And again, it's about double checking and making sure that the organisation has grasped the concept of dealing with actions, with dealing with errors, and actually putting those errors right. If when I carry out my audit that I don't find any issues with operational control, but historically they had high numbers of them, that would confirm to me that there's been an area of an improvement on operational control. So again, reviewing your non-conformances is quite an important one. And again, each standard will clarify the level and type of documentation that's needed within that standard. So it's obviously useful to know what them are, and it's useful to check them when you carry out your internal audits yourselves. So after the audit, the most important bit, isn't it? It's all really about feeding back to the organisation what your findings are. And you know, most organizations want to hear that we're doing things right, but also I think what's important, organizations need to be aware of the things that have gone wrong, you know, and what we're doing about them. Some of them might only be minor that you can fix in a very short space of time, and it might be an easy fix. Some errors may actually take longer periods of time, and by generating an audit report and reflecting the fact that you've had errors, it might give your organization's management team the justification they need to put in extra resources, as an example, to make sure that that's corrected. So, as we've said previously, identifying non-conformances it's an important part of the audit itself. And in an audit, if we find something that's not in compliance, it would generally raise a non-conformance. Identify what's wrong, so it gives you the ability to put that right in future, and hopefully not suffer from that in the future as well. After the audit, when you review the audit, you may, for example, you may realise that you need extra time to do certain actions, or certain actions are in the process of being done, where at least the audit report will clarify that, and it'll further strengthen the fact that either you need to put in more resource, you need to put in more effort, or that what you're doing is absolutely okay and we agreed to monitor it, and we've got a time frame for this to be completed, and we just haven't got to the end of that time frame. But again, it's just allowing you to make sure that you're checking it and that you're actually reviewing the performance of anything that you've historically found in the past. The audit report, it will describe what the auditors found and generally what actions were agreed at that time. That's if it's relevant to that particular audit. Generally, if you're working with managers and people, my experience of industry and service industry, manufacturing, there are a lot of people in the organisation. They're really helpful. They do want to talk to you, and they can come up with good ideas. Again, once those ideas are actually discussed, you know, you can discuss that between the management team to take it further, but at least people have an awareness on your understanding of that process and whether you need to do anything extra on top of it to put it right or improve it. And the audit reports themselves, again, they will clarify the audit objectives and your exact findings. So the audit report is effectively that there. It delivers all that. It tells you who the auditor were. It tells us what clause numbers we were looking at. It gives us what actual individual questions we're asking in the process itself. And on the main bulk of the centre part of that audit report, it's actually clarifying the evidence that we found as an auditor. And I think what is useful is we don't always remember things that we did a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Once you've got things and written down and you've got a footprint of what you've looked at, this is actually evidenceable further down the line. So 3 months later, you can actually clarify that you looked at the process and it was okay. It was all okay. You know, even for example, 2 years later, if you have a client complaint and it becomes an issue with production and service provision, well, you've got the actual assurance that on this particular day it was checked and it was found to be okay. So the error must have been a one-off. but at least it gives you that footprint and it gives you that historical information of being able to look back and see what was looked at in previous audits. And also, I think what's important as well is you can look back to last year's audit and you can say to yourself, well, I've looked at these 6 things in that audit last year. I'm going to look at two of the similar things the same, but I'm going to choose 4 other controls. So it actually mixes things up and it makes sure that you're not just looking at the same thing time and time again. Okay then, and I think the actual audit report, once that's been filed, once it's been written up, it allows a discussion to be had, doesn't it? You know, is it working right? Brilliant. Yeah, we can carry on with what we're doing. We're doing a good job. If it's not working right, you can have that conversation with your managers, your production managers, you know, your administrators. You can use it as leverage to say, well, generally we're doing okay, but what we need to look at, we need to be smarter on A, B, and C because at the moment we found that things are not achieving how they should be achieving. And again, you get buy-in from people if you explain to them what's going wrong. If you give them a chance to help you put it right, then you've got more of a chance on those actions not being repeated in the future. So again, we mentioned earlier about the resource for training and again, internal audit training in themselves. Some people may have vast experience of internal auditing. Some people may be just jumping in this from the actual the deep end, shall we say. QMS has a product or an offering for people who require some element of training in internal auditing, and that can be really customized around the organization. We can cover sort of general principles within a day, or we can extend that over 2 or more days, depending on the size of your organization and what level you'd like to go into. Again, when you look at more days training, it allows the us to come in and it allows us to actually look at what your systems are and make that relevant to your business, helping you set up some internal audit questions, checklists, that kind of thing, and generally doing a run on an audit and actually being with the auditor and letting them do the audit is almost like in a chaperone sense. So we're over your shoulder, we can give you guidance, you know, as part of that training. I mean, it's a good product and we cover many standards. As the slide there says, we cover 9001, 14001, 45001 and 27001. And again, for anybody who's new to auditing, it's a really good program there, whether you choose a day or 2 or more days. We can, as I say, we can customize that according to the needs of your organization. Some of the following slides, obviously, we're going to identify some of the contacts should anybody from the webinar wish to get in touch in terms of training, in terms of certification processes. And again, as the bottom statement there suggests, that gives you an overview of our online system that helps you manage management systems. I mean, any part of those that anybody wants to question, they can get in touch with QMS on those links. I think the marketing department will be providing a link there for certain things. I mean, one thing that I would like to say that the actual presentation from today, as the webinar itself, they'll be made available online. I think the webinar goes up very shortly after. I think it goes up within this next week, the actual webinar. So if you want to go over this this presentation again with as you've experienced it today, that will be available. And then I think the team at QMS, they will be sending out an email with contact details, and I think that they'll be providing you with a copy of the or a link to a copy of the actual presentation slides that fall in the background. So if you want to come back to reference any of the parts that we've talked about, there'll be a set of slides there for you there after I think they're made available for you tomorrow. So that's generally internal auditing. And I'm just looking at the question list there. There is a few questions there. There's quite a lot, but I'm aiming to answer some of these questions. if possible. I don't see any reason why. Let's just have a look. Why we can't answer all of these if my moderator's okay with that one. I think it should be okay. What are the good practices for an internal audit in supporting living services? So, I mean, generally speaking, this would be centered around what processes you've got already in place. So if you have certain processes and procedures, it would be looking at those procedures and looking to make sure that those procedures are being followed, and that, for example, I would imagine that supported living services requires certain types of documentation. So have you got things in place to make sure that supports that person that you're supporting, as an example? And a lot of them will be sort of personal information. So you again, you can look at making sure you've got the right records, making sure that your records are protected. It could be that everybody's following the actual processes that they should be following. And obviously, when you've had failures, making sure that those failures have been dealt with in a reasonably quick fashion, and in a professional in a professional manner as well. I think good practices for internal auditing will always really centre around the processes that you've got and you following those processes. And as long as you can check on it, it's almost like checking the checker. As long as you can check on that and check various elements of it, you will effectively develop a good internal audit practices. I'm hoping that answers your question there. Okay, then. Next question. Yes, as we've just identified earlier, I think tomorrow the marketing department will be sending out the actual slides, and also the webinar will be made available online. So everybody in attendance will get an email. Feel free to download the actual slides themselves, and again, use it use it for your own business. Use it to remind you there. Use it to remind yourself of this actual webinar itself. So yes, you will be getting the slides. Thanks, Judith. Am I currently introducing an integrated management system incorporating, I am, incorporating a 9001, 14001 and 45. So we're looking at integrating 3 standards into one here. Provided any difference per standard are included, is it satisfactory to do 1 internal audit per session clause covering all standards? So this is at the heart of integrated auditing. Right, so my advice for this one, if you, for example, put your management systems, if you printed out the index page of the management systems for 9, 14 and 45, what you will notice, there are subtle differences between certain sections. And in essence, for example, section 8 in 9001 is different to 14,001 and 45,001. Now, sections 4, 5 and 6 and 7 are very, very similar. So I mean, this is just generally speaking, sections 4, 5 and 7, you'll be able to audit as one integrated audit. The reason why I say 6 is also slightly different is because there are different requirements under section 6 for 14, 45 and 9. You've got slight variance. Where a lot of the variance comes in, you'll notice that there's probably a lot more to do under section 8 than there is under section 8 operations, shall we say, under 9001, there's a lot more to do in that than there is in the 14 and the 45. So yes, it is okay to do integrated audits where the clauses align. So policy, yes, you can audit that as one audit and audit your 3 policies. Job done. Where you've got to be careful is making sure, for example, 9001 section 8, it contains products and service provision. 8.5. That doesn't exist in 14 and 45. So if you hope to cover section 8 and don't include production service provision, you're not going to include that relevant section from the 9001. So just be mindful. It's always a good exercise to actually list all the clauses or all the processes and then look to see where the differences are and introduce, for example, what it might be is you're doing 3 audits on section 8, one for 9001, one for section 8 of 14,001 and one for section 8 of 45,001. And that way you're guaranteed that you're actually covering all aspects of the standard. I'm hoping that answers your question there, Adam. Right, this is a question from Caroline. We've had our current audit form for around 8 years now without a change. Should you change your audit form regularly, i.e. add or remove items, or is it acceptable to use the same for each and foreseeable audits? Now, it's an interesting question. Now, what the thing, without any more information, Caroline, just to reiterate one thing, generally, if you've had that same audit report for eight years, depending on what standard you're on, most of the standards have been upgraded or advanced since 8 years ago. So, for example, 18,001 is no longer, it's 45,001. So it'd be interesting to see whether you're actually covering all the clauses in your current audit. Again, if you have somebody like QMS coming in to do the external audits, it's always worth a conversation with the auditor and have that discussion. Because I would always just look to make sure that those audit records are covering all the clauses of the standard that need to be covered. Obviously, if you've got any clauses that aren't relevant to your organisation, they'll become an exclusion and you wouldn't audit them. Now, I just want to also extend from this question. I do think it's a good idea not to always repeat the same areas auditing every single audit. And now, you're not going to get away from that under policy, for example. Auditing your policy, you're auditing the fact that you've got a policy, it's in date, it's been approved, and that people are being communicated to. There's not much change year on year that actually will ever change that one. But when you look at Section 8 from the 9001, there are so many things in that section there that you can audit that'll change. So purchasing 1 year, you might look at purchase orders, you might look at purchase approvals, and you might look at invoices. The next year, you might look at the fact that you've got an approved suppliers list, the fact that you've got a system to control it, and you might look at the communications between all quotations. So it's a good idea to sort of mix it up where you can. Is my answer to this one, and don't. I think you should refrain from, dare I say the word, copying and pasting the same text, time and time again, because again, you're trying to get an overview of how robust your system is as a whole. And if you're only looking at certain aspects year on year, you're not really looking at all the gaps, are you, over a 1 or a 2 year period. Now, I'm hoping that answers the question. Feel free to ask more questions if obviously you feel the need. I'm quite happy to answer any of the questions that come forward. Can we have the next one, please, moderator? If you provide a service that is classed as the product, or does this fall under process? Okay, then, if you provide a service, is this classed as a product? Right, I suppose if you provide a service, it's classed as a service. Generally, under the 9001 standard, the term product and or services, it's intertwined. So some people, for example, they may run a call center and they're providing a call center service. Other organizations may provide both. So they're a manufacturing company, but they've got a sales center. So they manufacture the products, which is producing things, and then their service center or their sales center actually provides the service of making sure the client gets what they want and then delivering it, as an example. Now, I think it's a good point. You could actually have a number of services that you actually class as a product, and I think what will distinguish this is your written procedures, won't it? Because it'll say, it might be, for example, it might be a delivery service, it might be a packing service, and that service might actually be packaged as a product. So as part of that service, you get a man with a top hat and white gloves, and it's more than just a delivery, isn't it? It's almost like a product that's finely wrapped and delivered to your door in a personal fashion. So again, a product, generally when we talk about products, it's a thing that you're either manufacturing generally, or that you're helping to create for a client. And generally your processes will define whether it's a product or a service anyway. I'm hoping that answers your question there, Kathleen. Thank you. Can you give a little advice for those who are micro business when it comes to performing audits with only 1 or 2 employees? Thanks, Deborah. That's a very, very, very good question, because it's one that often comes up with many clients. And now, the one thing that I will say is we have clients in QMS that exist as 1 employee. The managing director is almost, you know, he or she does absolutely everything. And I think the thing that business owners have to understand is if you're wanting certification to a management system, it requires certain things for you to do. Just like if you want paying from a client, you have to provide them with an invoice. You know, we'll give them an invoice, we'll give them the service, and then we expect payment. I think one thing for yourselves when it's only a small business is don't be putting days and days and days and days and days into the audit. Remember the audit report on the slide that I give? You know, and it had, for example, it had like 5 or 6 checks. Now, if you think that that's timely, consider only doing 3 checks. Check 3 things in your process rather than 5 or 6. This also comes down to scheduling. If you schedule your audits across the year and say, right, I'm going to do 1 audit at the end of January, 1 in February, 1 in March, April, May, June, and July, and then you have the discipline to stick to it, and you do set aside time, because it does require a slight bit of discipline. It's time management, and if you think that you're not going to get it done at the end of the month, well, program it for the middle of the month. Program it for a Thursday afternoon when you're perhaps not as busy as you are at the beginning or the back end of the week. So again, make sure that you do your scheduling for the audits, and you know, spot check 2 or, well, I always say 3. I think 3 is the magic number. Spot check at least three things from each process or from the clause, and don't make it rocket science. Remember what I said in the presentation. An audit report should really be, what do we say we do? What is it that I've found? And it should literally be, it isn't rocket science. It's literally as simple as that. The only thing is we're following the processes that you've identified, and we're writing down what evidence that we found. Remember, what is it that we say we do? What is it that I've found? It doesn't have to be Lord of the Rings, 40 volumes long. It can literally be, oh, right, we do this. Right, this is the evidence what I've found, and this is the records that I can evidence. Done, move on. And I think that after performing your audits after 1 year, you actually get a feel for how long some of those audits may take. So some areas of your management system, for example, might take a bit longer than others. So you can actually bring that back into your planning. If there's only 1 person in the organisation, I think the training, awareness, and competence section. So that's going to be quite easy for you, isn't it? You may have carried out you may have carried out some training, or you haven't, but because you're the only person in there, you can reference your own records if they're up to date or not. So again, and if you are struggling with it, or you can always ask a consultant when they come in and do the audits, and have that conversation with them, because they'll be able to give you an element of advice. Plus, you can always look for the resources on QMS website. There's loads of resources, videos, and things on internal auditing. You can speak with somebody at QMS if you're really worried about an element. We would rather you be happy and confident in doing this, rather than you struggling and getting to the end of the year thinking, I'm not being able to do that, I'm in the right mess. We don't want that. We want you to be able to run with it and be efficient with it at the same time. So I'm hoping that helps, Deborah. Thanks for the question. If carrying out internal audits, does the person carrying out them have to be recognised qualification? And that's from Helen. Thanks, Helen. So as an auditor from where I sit, and I go into organisations, you would imagine that yes, I think it's only right that we do have qualifications for internal auditing, but for it's not for internally auditing. It's really, if you want to set somebody on a recognised qualification, larger organisations do this, and they might have specific teams with internally that only deal with auditing. Yes, that's a very good idea. I think having training and helping people understand what auditing is about and how it should be done is important. I don't think it's necessary that they've got a qualification. Yes, it does always help. Qualifications obviously set a standard that you follow to deliver those audits. I think one thing that everybody in the webinar really should really be aware of is look at the experience you've got in your organization. If I've been a purchasing manager and I've been in the purchasing role for 20 years, it should be expected that purchasing manager's got a good overview of how the purchasing process should work and whether it's being followed or not. And that person can help in internal auditing. They may be even able to help setting up a checklist for internal audits. So what questions am I going to ask? And again, it falls down to all functions within your organization. Somebody who's been on projects, as an example, who's been doing projects for 5 years, they've got a good idea of how a project should be initiated, how it should be followed, and what verification and validation you're going to need. So again, yes, it is useful to have a qualification. It's also useful to have experience and training. And again, I think I'd put personally for internally for organizations, I would put experience and learning above the actual qualification itself. I'm hoping that answers your question there, Helen. If doing an Excel audit sheet, can the box just be dated when the clause has been checked and passed for the audit? So, right, I do see this in when I'm out in the field, and although I mean, how easy is it to just check a date off or to put a tick in a box? I think the purpose of an audit is to check what your processes are. And I think what I always say to my clients when I'm faced with this is what visibility have you got on that audit? So, for example, if the managing director wanted to look back at that audit sheet and says, has Robert done that audit? Okay, then he's ticked it off on that date, but that's hearsay, isn't it? It's just saying, yes, I've done it. It's not actually saying, okay, then Rob's done this, but look at the bullet points. Remember that audit report that was in the actual presentation? It actually had a set of clear, evidenceable statements in there of what we found. And I would always urge people to put a reasonable level of comment in the actual audit of what their findings are, because you could get to a day before the audit and just tick, 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 tick and put a date on. It doesn't necessarily mean that an audit's been carried out. It just means that somebody's put a date in a box. Whereas if you have got that additional commentary in there from a senior management point of view, you've got the assurance to say, well, okay, then on this day, these elements were checked and there was in compliance. And again, it helps if, for example, if you have clients with complaints and it may be about a particular way a product's designed, you could look back in your audits and you could say, well, actually, 2 days before that product was made, Rob carried out an audit and he checked these processes. So generally, that's telling me that we do have compliance and we've got assurance that our processes are working how they should be. And again, mistakes do happen, and we realise that generally. But I think having a reasonable level of commentary in those audit reports is expected. And again, let me give you this analogy. If I attended your site from QMS and I came there to do a full day's audit, and the actual audit report was just basically a series of tick boxes with a date on, would you, as a managing director, be satisfied that I've carried out the audit? Because there could be some questions asked on that. Is okay then, yeah, he's checked it, but how do I know what's been checked? And I always think giving you traceability, giving almost transparency as well. It gives you transparency of what's been looked at. So I would always, err on the side of caution with just dates and ticks and get as much information on what you've looked at, because generally you're looking at that information. So just clarify what you've looked at. Once you've done that, move on to the next section. I'm hoping that answers that question, Judith. You are probably going to cover it, but I really appreciate if you could address how you approach audits that cover all 3 standards. So I think we covered this generally in a statement, sorry, in one of the questions before, Ali. I mean, again, what I'll really reiterate with this question is, if you get the index from all standards, so theoretically have 3 pages of an Excel worksheet open, and in your first, or do it in columns. In your first column, put all the clauses of the 9001, each one. So you'll go from 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, 4.4, 5.1, etc., and go all the way down and make sure all the clauses are listed. Then for your next standard, do the same. List all the clauses, because that way you are going to be able to see where your common areas are and whether things can be done in an integrated fashion or not. And this really reiterates to some of the points that I raised earlier. What you'll probably find is section 6 and section 8 are different in the what I call the popular standards. So 9001 quality, 14,001 environment, and 45,001 health and safety. Yeah, section 6 and section 8, those are potentially the areas that you'll see most difference. There'll be a lot of commonality. I'm not saying it's exactly the same, but that's just generally speaking, there's a lot of commonality. So look at that as an exercise. I always encourage my clients to do that, because it's all part of that learning process. And once you see it there on an Excel workbook or on a page that, yeah, I've got these common elements, these are totally different, these are common and these are common, right, brilliant. It'll allow you to then set up your audit schedules to reflect how you see your management systems being run. I'm hoping that answers the question. Can the auditor be a quality manager? I think I read somewhere there couldn't be. An auditor can be anybody from in the organisation. Ideally, you want them to have some experience. You want them to be professional, etc., etc. Some organisations are only small, so by virtue of them running the management system, they're effectively doing managing the documentation, making sure that non-conformances are being reported, that they're being actioned. I don't think the statement's true that they couldn't be a quality manager. It can literally be anybody can do the auditing, as long as, again, they're professional about it, and as long as that they're assessing the relevant parts of the management system. We do have a lot of quality managers actually who do the internal audits simply because of the sort of small size of the organisation. And when you've only got, for example, 1 or 2 people in the organisation, well, what chance have you got auditing it if you're not auditing it as the person who's, for example, managing your 9001? Some people don't have the option, but again, we covered this in the slide. There's an element there of being independent. You've just got to be careful that if, for example, I have a purchasing manager that's auditing the purchasing process, is he or she going to be so protective that it's all going to be hunky-dory and everything's as it should be? Or are you confident that even though that person may have found a mistake, that are they going to raise it as a mistake? Are they going to be prepared to hold their hand up and say this is wrong? Because that's what's important. It's important to make sure that impartiality actually feeds through into the actual audit report itself. As I say, my answer to that particular question, Lorraine, is it can be anybody, within the organisation, providing that they're professional, that they have an understanding of the processes that they're auditing. I'm hoping that answers that question. Does the internal audit need to comprise of all 4 types of audit, and are you required to specify which type you are conducting? No. In principle, it's up to you how you choose to do your audit. How you choose to do your audit. I think really the actual outcome, or what is required, is being able to demonstrate that by carrying out 3 audits, 4 audits, 7 audits, 10 audits, by carrying out however many audits that you've got, you've been able to cover the clauses that are required from the actual management system. So it's either clauses from the standard or if you've had a manual that's written in accordance with the standard, it's making sure that you've audited that manual and that potentially those processes are operating as they should be doing. It's not specifically required to actually identify which type of audit that you're doing. I think what you'll find is by virtue of you creating the audit report and how that's written up, it will, for me, I can generally see whether it's a process-based approach or it's a product approach. And again, it's up to you, as long as at the end of the year you're able to confirm that you've audited all aspects of that system. So I'm hoping that answers the question. How long should you keep audit records? Forever. so that's not strictly true. I mean, I think nowadays we've got computers, haven't we, and we can scan paper documents in. We've generally got backup systems, so you know, we would be keeping these records anyway. Now, for the purpose of QMS to come in, at least 12 months. It's handy to have them for longer than that, at least 24 months. But for example, if I have going to an organisation, it's all paper based. I would generally recommend that they keep their records for at least 24 months. And if they, for example, package all their paper up and send it to document archiving in a bunker somewhere, well, at least we've got current and historical records available that covers the last 2 years. I mean, as an auditor, anybody who's doing auditing, I'd always make sure that from day one I've got a copy of my records, no matter how long I was within an organisation. And as I say there, I think your backup systems and your online systems, your network servers, that generally ensures that you've got availability on those documents should you need them in future anyway. For the purpose of audits, as I say, just to keep it clear, 12 months is a minimum, 24 recommended. Can quality meetings and management review meetings happen as on, or do they need to be kept separate? So good question, Steve. So I think, generally speaking, quality meetings may be held on a day-to-day basis. It might be as a set meeting on a monthly basis, or however the organisation chooses to do that. Some organisations will obviously hold quality meetings because they're more critical. When you're producing food, particularly, or components for people like the Ministry of Defence, example, you're probably going to be having quality meetings a lot more frequently. Now, the mention of management review meetings, as part of most standards, not every standard, but certainly the common standards anyway, the 9000, the 14 and the 45001, management review is a requirement from the standard, very much the same as internal auditing. You are mandated to hold management review meetings. Now, generally your processes will identify how often they should be done. So, you know, the general rule is it's either once a year, you know, twice a year, 4 times a year. That's kind of the general uptake is what we see. Now, if your management processes say that you hold management review meetings twice a year, then when we come into audit and when you do your own internal audits, we'll expect to see historical records that show that you've had your 2 management reviews a year. I think what you'll find often, Steve, is your management review is an overall performance appraisal of how you've managed your system, how your management system. It's an overall look, you know, look at what non-conformances you've got. When you look at quality meetings, they're more sort of based on day-to-day, month-by-month sort of operational style quality. So, you know, it might be looking at things like material issues, things like that. They will generally be more frequently. Now, it's not to say that actually your quality meetings and management review at the same time. You know, it can happen, but look to what your processes say that you should do. And if you mandate yourself to have 2 management reviews a year, just make sure that you're following that management review agenda and you're appraising the performance of your management system rather than individual items within your production processes, as an example. I'm hoping that answers your question. Feel free to add more questions if you need to. So my directors don't see the importance of non-conformance reports, and as a result, we barely receive any each year in spite of them happening? How can I get them to buy into the importance and realize their usefulness? Now, that's a very important question, because I kind of identified this within the actual in the webinar itself. So my advice to you, Caroline, is make sure that your management system manual or your process document clarifies what you should do. And when you're carrying out an internal audit report, when you check it and it's not following what you do, clearly write in the evidence that you've found. If it is a non-conformance, through the audit report, you'd raise a non-conformance and then present that to the management team. Now, I think one thing that you shouldn't do is discount non-conformances, because it goes back to looking at firefighting. You know, what are we doing to get things? What are we doing to make sure that this isn't happening? Caroline, I don't know your business exactly, but you look at what your business does. Look at, for example, an area that where you know there are frequent misdemeanors, shall we say, or frequent non-conformances, and start to log them as non-conformances. And it might be that somebody's not signing off a purchase order, or somebody's not filling out a quality check sheet. Keep recording it and have a summary list, and actually show that list to the managing director and say, look, we've got an opportunity for these mistakes not to happen, you know, and I want to put them right. So let me try and put them right, because what we want to do is reduce the amounts of things that we're getting wrong. And I think until you are actually reporting these and making it known, you know, we don't fully understand the reasons why they need to be done. Just one other thing before we move on, Caroline, as well. You could look at the actual, what's the consequence of these non-conformances happening, and if it can be linked to, for example, cost base. Is it costing the company? Is it costing the company in your time correcting it? Is it costing people's time in correcting it? One useful exercise I did was calculate the number of hours I was spending on doing accident reports, because over the course of a week or a month, or even a 6-month period, if I'm spending 50 person hours in dealing with accidents and writing up reports, it's actually telling me there that I could be putting that 60 hours into something more useful. What are we doing to prevent them accidents? So again, it's actually getting you to look at what the wider implications are. And you could go to the director and say, well, actually, if we address this now, we could save ourselves £20,000 in the next 6 months. So you've kind of got to be canny with it, if I can use that term, but help your director understand the consequences of not dealing with non-conformances, and report the non-conformances. Don't be afraid to report them and document them. And as part of the auditor, that's actually your job, isn't it? If you're taking the principles of what's required. When there's something not going right, we mandate ourselves by the standard to raise non-conformances. Otherwise, we're not really compliant to the standard. So I'm not going to say it's a massively common one. We do see this in the field as well. And again, we just have that conversation, and we broaden people's understanding of what the non-conformance processes is for. It's not for beating with a stick, and it's not for wasting time. It's really to prevent you from wasting time in future and to stop you from firefighting. Okay, thanks, Caroline, for that one. Is it okay if we automate system audits? 100%. If you want to automate your system audits and carry it out, via your iPads or via some other mechanism, then automate it. Let's go back to the golden rule. As long as you can demonstrate that throughout the year you've checked your processes and those processes are in alignment with the standard, as long as you've got records for that and we can see them, that's what's required of the standard. How you carry out those audits is entirely up to you. For example, we'll go back to, are you carrying out a process-based approach or a systems-based approach? It's entirely up to you. Again, we just want to make sure that you've got the records and those records are checking all aspects of the standard. So yes, is the answer to that one. Thank you. Is a quality manual absolutely necessary? We use the QMS online system. So, I mean, it's a good question. A quality manual is not necessary. It's not mandated by the actual standard itself. However, when you look over the clauses themselves, generally, if you've got a QMS online system or you've got a set of processes in place, those processes will clarify what elements of the clauses those processes are addressing. Now, if you've not got a manual or processes in place, it does become a little bit of a task when you come to auditing, because, for example, as an auditor, I do ask for a manual or some processes, because that gives me the roadmap of the questions that I'm going to ask in that audit. Plus, what it will generally do is it will clarify common terms that the organisation uses. So, for example, some organisations might use the word quotation, some might use fee representation or request for quotation. It's all about clarifying what language that you're using, so that, for example, somebody like me can look at it and go, right, I see that you use requests for quotations. Can you show me 3 examples of your request for quotations? It becomes a lot easier for the internal auditor to follow. And again, it's a lot easier for any external auditor or any manager to follow if they want to look at it. So again, not absolutely necessary, but very, very useful to clarify what your aims and objectives are of the management system and how that complies with the standard. So yeah, hope that answers that one. How many internal audits do you advise doing per year? Is there a minimum and maximum? So for new organisations that are just being registered onto a standard, you have to carry out an internal audit of that full system, covering the entire system itself. So basically, if you opened up a management system standard, it starts at section 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and it goes to section 10. And you've got to make sure in your first year that you've audited all those 10 main clauses, and generally that you've touched on the sub clauses as well. So that's in your first year. For established organisations, once you've got you've gone through your first year and you're onto your second year, you may choose to continue doing the full system audit in 1 year, or, like we said earlier in the presentation, you may choose to do that over a 3-year period. So in year number 1, you do a third of the system, sections, I don't know, 4, 5, and 6. In year number 2, it might be 7 and 8, and then in year number 3, 9 and 10. And again, your internal audits internal audit plan will reflect the numbers of audits that you're actually doing. Just as a side note from that one, if you spread your audits over a 3-year period, as an example, what it allows you to do is it allows you to audit 3 sections from the actual standard itself. You can do that in a year. But if, for example, the previous year you've had that issue there, your risk assessments hasn't been quite what they should have been doing, people aren't following the training, what it allows you to do is not only audit the 3 areas in year 2, you might set up separate audits to look at training specifically or to look at risk assessments, just to make sure that based on last year's results, we are keeping an eye on this and we're making sure that we're not suffering from it year on year on year on year. So the minimum is cover all the elements of the standard, and how many audits you want to do and document. As long as it covers all aspects of the standard, you can repeat those audits as often as you like. Thanks for that question, Samantha. Right, brilliant. I've absolutely loved the question and answer session from everybody, obviously, that sent those questions in. Thanks ever so much for attending the webinar. Thanks for all those questions. It's been very interesting speaking with everybody. I hope everybody's had a good sort of afternoon with the webinar and the question and answer session. As we said earlier, the presentation itself and the webinar will be available online, and you'll receive some information from our team at QMS of how you can access that information. So thanks, Judith, for that. Thank you. Are there any more questions? I think, let me just have a look. Oh, wait on. I think there was all thanks from there. So once again, I'd like to just thanks everybody for being in attendance. Thanks for everybody staying to the end as well. It's been quite an informative question and answer session, as I said before. That's been absolutely brilliant. So thanks for those. So I'd like to conclude this webinar. Thanks ever so much. And if you just bear with me for a second. Yes, the marketing email will be provided to you, but I'm just going to put the marketing email in the chat as well, should anybody wish to get in touch with the marketing team who help support these webinars. There we are, I've put that in the chat as well. So everything there will be available to you within the next day or so. And I think the webinar takes a bit longer than a day to actually get up there, the actual video, but please look out for it. Please remember that should you have any questions, that follow the email contacts that's on the actual presentation itself. There's the marketing email on the question list there. Get in touch with QMS. Phone them up. We've got the website. There's loads of resources on there. There's lots of stuff there for internal auditing as well. Stay in touch. Have a great afternoon, and thanks ever so much. Thank you.